But even then, we still ensured that due process was followed. Prior to detention, people subjected to the Alien Enemies Act in the 1940s appeared before the Alien Enemy Hearing Board, where they could at least present evidence that they had no ties to Axis powers. As one circuit court judge recently said of Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act, there's no regulations, and nothing was adopted by agency officials that were administrating this. The people weren't even given notice. They weren't told where they were going. They were given these people on those planes, they were getting those people on the planes on Saturday and had no opportunity to file habeas or any type of action to challenge their removal. The standards of 1940 during World War II were higher than the standards of this president? The following are people that Trump has targeted and removed without criminal charges, without a hearing, without evidence, to a prison rife with human rights abuses in El Salvador. These are the people that he has sent there. A tattoo artist seeking asylum who entered the country legally. An aspiring pop musician with a tattoo of a hummingbird. A 24-year-old who used to teach swim classes for children with developmental disabilities and has a tattoo of an autism awareness ribbon in honor of his brother. A Venezuelan who had fled violence in Venezuela last year and came to the United States to seek asylum. His lawyer wrote on social media, ICE alleged that his tattoos are gang-related. They are absolutely not. Our client worked in the arts in Venezuela. He is gay. LGBTQ, his tattoos are benign. He has no criminal record. Another Venezuelan removed to this El Salvadorian prison is a barber with no criminal history. Another professional is a professional soccer player, has a tattoo with a soccer ball and a rosary closely resembling the logo of his favorite soccer team. This is stunning. What we're doing. These people were swept up and sent to another prison known for its human rights abuses because they were Venezuelan and had tattoos, benign tattoos. An article was published in one periodical about the anguish from families. Here are a few excerpts from the article. You are here because of your tattoos. The Trump administration sent Venezuelans to El Salvador's most infamous prison. Their families are looking for answers. On Friday, March 14th, Arturo Suarez Trejo called his wife, Natalie Sanchez, from an immigration detention center in Texas. Suarez, a 33-year-old male, native of Caracas, Venezuela, explained that his deportation flight had been delayed. He told his wife he still would be home soon. Suarez did not go back to Venezuela. Still, there was at least a silver lining. In December, Sanchez had given birth to their daughter, Nahira. Suarez would finally have a chance to meet their 3-month-old baby girl he had never, ever seen. But Sanchez told the outlet she had not heard from Suarez since. Instead, last weekend, she found herself zooming in on a photo the government of El Salvador published of Venezuelan men the Trump administration had sent to President Nayib Bukele's infamous terrorism confinement center, or CCOT. I realized that one of them was my husband, she said. I recognized him by his tattoo, by his ear, and a scar on his chin. Even though I couldn't see his face, I knew it was him. The photo of Sanchez examined, a highly produced propaganda video promoted by Secretary of State and the White House, showed Venezuelans shackled in prison uniforms as they were pushed around by guards and had their heads shaved. The tattoo on Suarez's neck is of colibri, a hummingbird. His wife said it was meant to symbolize harmony and good energy. She said his other tattoos, like a palm tree on his hand, and an homage to Suarez's late mother's use of Venezuelan expression about God being greater than the coconut tree, were similarly innocuous. Needless to say, they may be why Suarez has been effectively disappeared by the U.S. government into an El Salvadorian mega prison. We must keep our country safe. violent criminals, people with long criminal records who are not citizens, I think every American would agree. They should be deported. Immigrants to this country surprisingly have a much lower rate of breaking laws, but if they break laws, I agree. But maybe you're an immigrant that's never broken a law. Maybe you're a naturalized citizen. Maybe you were born here. The problem with this idea of disappearing people with no due process is once that foundation is laid, if they're able to defend that lack of due process, to use that law from the 1700s, we begin a process in this country that even conservative justices of the Supreme Court said is unjustifiable. Denying people due process pushes us down a road where more exceptions can be made. You cannot deny fundamental rights to another and not endanger them for yourself. We have created a system now, if Trump is successful, where you can just say, you can just claim, you can just point to someone and say they're from X country or claim that they're part of a gang. And without any due process, without any vetting, without going before any independent arbiter, you are disappeared. Because there's just no way to challenge them. No due process for non-citizens means that we are a country in violation of those ideals I talked about from here. It says at the beginning of this country, that says very simply, no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or pursuit or property. No one without due process of law. As soon as we break that, as soon as we violate that, we're going down a road. Anton Scalia, I confess, I've disagreed with him on so many things, but this conservative justice once sat in an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They had a relationship that I think was special and shows that even people that have distinctly different views can still make real human connection in our country. They were asked by an interviewer whether undocumented people have the 5 freedoms: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government. Here is what the conservative Justice Scalia said. Oh, I think so. I think anybody who is present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution. Americans abroad have that protection. Other people abroad do not. They don't have the protections of our constitutions, but anyone who is present in the United States has the protections of the United States Constitution. Anton Scalia, one of the most conservative members of the highest court in our land. And of course, Ginsburg, his ideological opposite, she concurred when she said, when we get to the 14th Amendment, it doesn't speak of citizens as some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says persons, and that the person is every person who was here in our country, documented or undocumented. Our Constitution is clear on the face. If you are an originalist like Anton Scalia and you read the Constitution's words, you have to stand for the idea that no one should be denied due process, that the government can't walk up to a human being and grab them off the street and put them on a plane and send them to one of the most notorious prisons in the world and just say, as one of our authority did, oopsie. Think about that. And that happened to a father of an American child. Think about that. That happened to a husband of an American woman. Think about that. That happened to a man who a judge already said he had the right to stay. When the rights of some are violated, they are a threat to the rights of all of us. In January, ICE agents in New Jersey raided a small business without a warrant and detained a Puerto Rican military veteran, a Boricua, an American citizen, detained him even after he presented his valid ID to those ICE agents. This is one example of so many. Some Americans have already been caught in Trump's immigration dragnet. More will be. An article by Nicole Foy. About a week after President Trump took office, Jonathan Guerrero was sitting at a Philadelphia car wash where he works when immigration agents burst in. The agents didn't say why they were there and didn't show their badges, Guerrero recalled. So the 21-year-old didn't get a chance to explain that although his parents were from Mexico, he was born right there in the city of brotherly love. An agent pointed his gun at Guerrero and handcuffed him. Then they brought in other car wash workers, including Guerrero's father, who's undocumented. When agents began checking IDs, they finally noticed that Guerrero's was a citizen and quickly let him go. I said, look, man, I don't know who these guys are and what they're doing. With anything law-related, I just stay quiet. Less than 2 months into the Trump administration, there has been a small but steady beat of more and more reported cases like Guerrero's. In Utah, agents pulled over and detained a 20-year-old American after he honked at them. In New Mexico, a member of the Muscalera Apache Nation, more than 2 hours from the border, was stopped and questioned by agents who demanded to see their passports. Earlier this month, a Trump voter in Virginia was pulled over and handcuffed by a gun-wielding immigration agent. It's unclear exactly how many citizens have faced the Trump administration's dragnet so far, and while previous administrations have mistakenly held Americans too, there's no firm count on these incidents either. Government doesn't release figures on citizens who have been held by immigration authorities, neither Customs and Border Protection, neither Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which handles interior immigration enforcement. Experts and advocates say what is clear to them, though, is that Trump's aggressive immigration policies, such as arrest quotas for enforcement agents, make it more and more likely that citizens will be caught up in immigration sweeps. In quotes, it's really everyone, not just non-citizens or undocumented people who are in danger of having their liberty violated in this kind of mass deportation machinery. Asked about reports of Americans getting caught up in administration's enforcement policies, an ICE spokesman told the outlet in a written statement that agents are allowed to ask for citizens' identification. Any U.S. immigration officer has authority to question without warrant any alien or person believed to be an alien concerning his or her right to be or to remain in the United States. The agency didn't respond to questions about specific cases. The U.S. has gone through spasms of detaining and even deporting large numbers of citizens. In the 1930s and 1940s, federal and local authorities forcibly exiled an estimated 1 million Mexican Americans, including hundreds of thousands of American-born children. That's our past. An estimated 1 million Mexican Americans, including hundreds of thousands of American-born children, swept up and deported. The U.S. Governmental Accountability Office report found that immigration authorities had asked to hold roughly 600 likely citizens during Trump's first term. The GAO, also the Government Accountability Office, also found that Trump actually deported about 70 likely American citizens. The GAO report did not get into any individual cases, but lawsuits brought against federal immigration agencies detailed dozens of cases where plaintiffs received a settlement. This will accelerate if there's no due process. In his first administration, there was some process. But this will accelerate if there's no due process. I live in Newark, New Jersey, and there are dozens of languages spoken in my city, and some of the elders from some of these many different ethnic groups, from European folks who don't speak English to folks from Asia that don't speak English. And imagine one of these Americans gets stopped and doesn't have papers on them, and they see a tattoo, and next thing you know, they're sent to Louisiana or Texas, and next thing you know, they're on a flight. That's not hyperbole. That's not some impossible thing. We know once due process is eliminated in this country, for some, all are in danger. It is a constitutional slippage that Scalia and conservatives who believe in the Constitution nobly object to. Canadian citizen Jasmine Mooney was detained by ICE for 2 weeks. I saw an interview of her, this white woman, stunned. Here's what she wrote. It's Canadian. There was no explanation, no warning. 1 minute, I was an immigration officer talking to an officer about my work visa, which has been approved months before and allowed me, a Canadian, to work in the United States. The next, I was told to put my hands against the wall and patted down like a criminal before being sent to an ICE detention center without the chance to talk to a lawyer. I grew up in Whitehorse, Yukon, a small town in the northernmost part of Canada. I always knew I wanted to do something bigger with my life. I left home early and moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, where I built a career spanning multiple industries, acting in film and television, owning bars and restaurants, flipping condos, and managing Airbnbs. In my 30s, I found my true passion, working in health and the wellness industry. I was given an opportunity to help launch an American brand of health tonics called Holy Water, a job that would involve moving to the United States. I was granted my trade work visa, which allows Canadian and Mexican citizens to work in the United States in specified professional occupations. I got it on my second attempt. It goes without saying then that I have no criminal record. I also love the United States and consider myself to be a kind, hardworking person. I started working in California and traveled back and forth between Canada and the US multiple times without any complications until one day, upon returning to the United States, a border officer questioned me about my initial visa denial and subsequent visa approval. He asked why I had gone to San Diego border the second time to apply. I explained that that was where my lawyer's offices were and that he had wanted to accompany me to ensure there were no issues. After a long interrogation, the officer told me that it seemed, quote, shady, and that my visa hadn't been properly processed. He claimed I couldn't work for a company in the US that made use of hemp, one of the beverage ingredients. He revoked my visa and told me I could still work for the company from Canada, but if I wanted to return to the US, I would need to apply. I was devastated. I had just started building a life in California. I stayed in California for the next few months and was eventually offered a similar position, but with a different health and wellness brand. I started the visa processes and returned to the same immigration office in San Diego at the border. Since they had processed my visa before and I was familiar with it, hours passed with many confused opinions about my case. The officer I spoke to was kind, but told me that due to my previous issues, I needed to apply for my visa through the consulate. I told her I hadn't been aware I needed to apply that way, but I had no problem doing it. Then she said something strange. You didn't do anything wrong. You were not in trouble. You were not a criminal. I remember thinking, why would she say that? Of course I'm not a criminal. Then she told me they had to send me back to Canada. That didn't concern me. I assumed I would simply book a flight home. But as I sat searching for flights, a man approached me and said, "Come with me." There was no explanation, no nothing. He took me to a room, took my belongings from my hands, and ordered me to put my hands against the wall. A woman immediately began patting me down. The commands came rapid fire, one after another, too fast to process. They took my shoes, pulled out my shoelaces. "What are you doing? What's happening?" I asked. "You are being detained." "I don't understand. What does that mean? For how long?" "I don't know." That would be the response to nearly every question I would ask over the next 2 weeks. I don't know. They brought me downstairs for a series of interviews and medical questions. They searched my bags and told me I had to get rid of half my belongings because I couldn't take everything with me. Take everything with me where, I asked. A woman asked me for the name of someone they could contact on my behalf. In moments like this, you realize you don't actually know anyone's phone number anymore. By some miracle, I had recently memorized my best friend Britt's number because I had been putting my grocery points on her account. They handed me a mat and a folded up sheet of aluminum foil. What's this? Your blanket. Dan. I was taken to a tiny freezing cement cell with bright fluorescent lights and a toilet. There were 5 other women lying on their mats with aluminum sheets wrapped around them looking like dead bodies. The guard locked the door behind me. For 2 days, we remained in the cell, only leaving briefly for food. The lights never turned off. We never knew what time it was, and no one answered our questions. No one in the cell spoke English, so I either tried to sleep or meditate to keep from having a breakdown. I didn't trust the food, so I fasted, assuming I wouldn't be there long. On the 3rd day, I was finally allowed to make a phone call. I called Britt and told her that I didn't understand what was happening. No one would tell me when I was going home, and that she was my only contact. They gave me a stack of paperwork to sign and told me I was being given a 5-year ban unless I applied for re-entry through the consulate. The officer also said it didn't matter whether I signed the papers or not, it was happening regardless. I was so delirious, I just signed. I told them I would pay for my flight home and asked when I could leave. No answer. They then moved me to another cell, this time with no mats or blanket. I sat freezing on the cement floor for hours. That's when I realized they were processing me into real jail, the Otay Mesa Detention Center. I was told to shower, given a jail uniform, fingerprinted and interviewed. I begged for information. How long will I be here? I don't know your case, the man said. Could be days, could be weeks, but I'm telling you right now, you need to mentally prepare yourself for months. Months? I felt like I was going to throw up. I was taken to the nurse's office for a medical check. She asked what happened to me. She had never seen a Canadian there before. When I told her my story, she grabbed my hand and said, "Do you believe in God?" I told her I had only recently found God, but now I believed in God more than anything. And she said, "I believe God brought you here for a reason. I know it feels like your life is in a million pieces, but you will be okay through this. I think you're going to find a way to help others." At the time, I didn't know what that meant. She asked if she could pray for me. I held her hands and wept. I felt like I had been sent a guardian angel. I was then placed in a real jail unit. 2 levels of cells surrounding a common area, just like in the movies. I was put in a tiny cell alone with a bunk bed and a toilet. The best part, there were blankets. After 3 days without one, I wrapped myself in mine and finally felt some comfort. For the first day, I didn't leave my cell. I continued fasting, terrified that the food might make me sick. The only available water came from the tap attached to the toilet in our cells or a sink in the common area, neither of which felt safe to drink. Eventually, I forced myself to step out, meet the guards, and learn the rules. One of them told me, "No fighting." I joked, "I'm a lover, not a fighter." He laughed. I asked if there had ever been a fight in there. "In this unit? No," he said. "No one in this unit has a criminal record." That's when I started meeting other women. That's when I started hearing their stories. And that's when I made a decision. I would never allow myself to feel sorry for my situation again. No matter how hard this was, I had to be grateful because every woman I met was in an even more difficult position than mine. There were around 140 of us in our unit. Many women had lived and worked in the U.S. legally for years, but had overstayed their visas, often after reapplying and being denied. They had all been detained without warning. If someone is a criminal, I agree they should be taken off the streets. But not one of these women had a criminal record. These women acknowledged that they shouldn't have leave for their actions, but their frustration wasn't about being held accountable. It was about the endless bureaucratic limbo they had been trapped in. The real issue was how long it took to get out of the system with no clear answers, no timeline, and no way to move forward. Once deported, many have no choice but to abandon everything they own because the cost of shipping their belongings back is too high. I met a woman who had been on a road trip with her husband. She said they had 10-year work visas. While driving near the San Diego border, they mistakenly got into a lane leading to Mexico. They stopped and told the agent they didn't have their passports on them, expecting to be redirected. Instead, they were detained. They were both pastors. I met a family of 3 who had been living in the U.S. for 11 years with work authorizations. They paid taxes and were waiting for green cards. Every year, the mother had to undergo a background check, but this time she was told to bring her whole family. When they arrived, they were taken into custody and told their status would now be processed from within the detention center. Another woman from Canada had been living in the U.S. with her husband, who was detained after a traffic stop. She admitted she had overstayed her visa and accepted that she would be deported, but she had been stuck in the system for almost 6 weeks because she had her passport. Who runs casual errands without their passport? One woman had a 10-year visa. When it expired, she moved back to her home country, Venezuela. She admitted she had overstayed by 1 month before leaving. Later, she returned from a vacation and entered the U.S. without issue. But when she took a domestic flight from Miami to Los Angeles, she was picked up by ICE and detained. She couldn't be deported because Venezuela wasn't accepting deportees. She didn't know where she was getting out. She didn't know when she was getting out. There was a girl from India who had overstayed her student visa for 3 days before heading back home. She then came back to the U.S. on a new visa to finish her master's degree and was handed over to ICE due to the 3 days she had overstayed on her previous visa. There were women who had been picked up off the streets from outside their workplaces, from their homes. All of these women told me that they had been detained from time spans ranging from a few weeks to 10 months. One woman's daughter was outside the detention center protesting for her release. That night, the pastor invited me into a service she was holding. A girl who spoke English translated for me as the woman took turns sharing their prayers for their sick parents, for their children they hadn't seen in weeks, for the loved ones that they had been torn away from. Then unexpectedly, they asked if they could pray for me. I was new here, and they wanted to welcome me. They formed a prayer circle around me, took my hands and prayed. I had never felt so much love, energy, and compassion from a group of strangers in my life. Everyone was crying. At 3 a.m. the next day, I was woken up in my cell. Pack your bag, you're leaving. I jolted upright. I get to go home? The operator shrugged. I don't know where you're going. Of course, no one knew anything. I grabbed my things and went downstairs, where 10 other women stood in silence, tears streaming down their faces, but these weren't happy tears. That was the moment I learned the term transferred. For many of these women, detention centers had become a twisted version of home. They had formed bonds, established routines, and found slivers of comfort in friendships they hadn't built. Now, without warning, they were being torn apart and sent somewhere new. Watching them say goodbye, clinging to each other was gut-wrenching. I had no idea what was waiting for me next. In hindsight, that was probably for the best. Our next stop was Arizona, the San Luis Regional Detention Center. The transfer process had lasted for 24 hours, a sleepless, grueling ordeal. This time, men were transported with us, roughly 50 of us crammed into a prison bus for the next 5 hours, packed together, women in the front, men in the back. We were bound in chains that wrapped tightly around our waists, with our cuffed hands secured to our bodies and shackles restraining our feet, forcing every moment into a slow, clinking struggle. When we arrived at our next destination, we were forced to go through the entire intake process all over again with medical exams, fingerprinting, and pregnancy tests. They linked us up in a filthy cell, squatting over a communal toilet, holding Dixie cups of urine while the nurses dropped pregnancy tests in each of our cups. It was disgusting. We sat in freezing cold jail cells for hours, waiting for everyone to be processed. Across the room, one of the women suddenly spotted her husband. They had both been detained and were now seeing each other for the first time in weeks. The look in their faces, pure love, relief, and longing, was something I'll never forget. We were beyond exhausted. I felt like I was hallucinating. The guard tossed us each a blanket and said, "Find a bed." There were no pillows. The room was cold as ice, and one blanket wasn't enough. Around me, women lay curled into themselves, heads covered, looking like a room full of corpses. This place made the last jail feel like the Four Seasons. I kept telling myself, do not let this break you. 30 of us shared one room. We were given one styrofoam cup for water and one plastic spoon that we had to reuse for every meal. I eventually had to start trying to eat. Sure enough, I got sick. None of the uniforms fit, and everyone had men's shoes on. The towels they gave us to shower with were hand towels. They wouldn't give us more blankets. The fluorescent lights shined on us 24/7. Everything felt like it was meant to break you. Nothing was explained to us. I wasn't given a phone call. We were locked in a room, no daylight out. I tried to stay calm as every fiber of my being raged toward panic mode. I didn't know how I would tell Britt where I was. Then, as if sent from God, one of the women showed me a tablet attached to the wall where I could send emails. I only remembered my CEO's email from memory. I typed out a message praying he would see it. He responded. Through him, I was able to connect with Britt. She told me that they were working around the clock trying to get me out, but no one had any answers. The system made it next to impossible. I told her about the conditions in this new place, and that was when we decided to go to the media. She started working with a reporter and asked whether I would be able to call her so she could loop him in. The international phone account that Britt had previously tried to set up for me wasn't working, so one of the other women offered to let me use her phone account to make a call. In that cell, we were all in this together. With nothing to do in my cell but talk, I made new friends. Women had risked everything for their chance at a better life for themselves and their families. Through them, I learned the harsh reality of seeking asylum. Showing me their physical scars, they explained how they had paid smugglers anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 to reach the U.S. border, enduring brutal jungles and horrendous conditions. One woman had been offered asylum in Mexico within 2 weeks, but had been encouraged to keep going to the U.S. Now she was stuck, living in a nightmare, separated from her young children for months. She sobbed, telling me how she felt like the worst mother in the world. Many of these women were highly educated and spoke multiple languages. Yet they had been advised to pretend they didn't speak English because it would supposedly increase their chances of asylum. Some believed they were being used as examples, as warnings to others not to come. Women were starting to panic in this new facility, and knowing I was most likely the first person to get out, they wrote letters and messages for me to send to their families. I felt like we all had been kidnapped, thrown in some sort of sick psychological experiment meant to strip us of every ounce of our strength and dignity. We were from different countries, spoke different languages, and practiced different religions, yet in this place, none of that mattered. Everyone took care of each other, everyone shared food, everyone held each other when someone broke down. Everyone fought to keep each other's hope alive. I got a message from Britt. My story had started to blow up in the media almost immediately after I was told I was being released. My ICE agent, who had never spoken before, told my lawyer I could have left sooner if I had signed a withdrawal form, and that they hadn't known I would pay for my own flight home. From the moment I arrived, I begged every officer I saw to let me pay for my own ticket home. Not a single one of them ever spoke to me about my case. To put things into perspective, I had a Canadian passport, lawyers, resources, media attention, friends, family, and even politicians advocating for me, yet I was still detained 2 weeks. Imagine what this system is like for every other person in there. A small group of us were transferred back to San Diego at 2 a.m. One last road trip, once again shackled in chains. I was then taken to the airport where 2 officers were waiting for me. The media was there, so the officers snuck me through a side door, trying to avoid anyone seeing me in my restraints. I was beyond grateful that at the very least I didn't have to walk through the airport in chains. To my surprise, the officers escorting me were incredibly kind and even funny. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. I asked if I could put my shoelaces back on. Yes, one of them said with a grin, but you better not run. Yeah, the other one added, or we'll have to tackle you in the airport. That'll really make headlines. I laughed and then told them I spent a lot of time observing the guards during my detention, and I couldn't believe how often I saw humans treating other humans with such disregard. But don't worry, I joked. You 2 get 5 stars. When I finally landed in Canada, my mom and 2 best friends were waiting for me. So was the media. I spoke to them briefly, numb and delusional from exhaustion. It was surreal listening to my friends recount everything they had done to get me out, working with lawyers, reaching out to the media, making endless calls to detention centers, desperately trying to get through to ICE or anyone who could help. They said the entire system felt rigged, designed to make it nearly impossible for anyone to get out. The reality became clear. ICE detention isn't just a bureaucratic nightmare, it's a business. These facilities are privately owned and run for profit. Companies like Core Civic and Geo Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. Core Civic made over $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, Geo Group more than $763 million from ICE contracts. The more detainees, the more money they make. It stands to reason that these companies have no incentive to release people quickly. What I had experienced was finally starting to make sense. This is not just my story. It is a story of thousands and thousands of people still strapped in a system that profits from their suffering. I am writing in hopes that someone out there, someone with power to change any of this, can help do something. The strength I witnessed in those women, the love they gave despite their suffering, is what gives me faith. Faith that no matter how flawed the system is, how cruel the circumstances, humanity will always shine through. Even in the darkest places, within the most broken systems, humanity persists. Sometimes it reveals itself in the smallest, unexpected acts of kindness, a shared meal, prayer, a hand reaching out in the dark. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend. We are defined by the love we extend, by the courage we summon, and the truths we are willing to tell. It's the end of the article. The stories continue. A 10-year-old citizen in Texas, recovering from brain cancer, was detained at a Border Patrol checkpoint, and eventually the American citizen was deported to Mexico with her undocumented parents, even though they were in need of medical attention for their brain cancer. Here's the article from NBC. U.S. citizen child recovering from brain cancer removed to Mexico with undocumented parents. A family that was deported to Mexico hopes they can find a way to return to the U.S. and ensure their 10-year-old daughter, my fellow American, who is a U.S. citizen, can continue her brain cancer treatment. Immigration authorities removed the girl and 4 of her American siblings from Texas on May 4th. 5 Americans in total. When they deported their undocumented parents, the family's ordeal last month when they were rushing from the Rio Grande City where they live to Houston, where their daughter's specialist doctors are based for emergency medical checkup. The parents had done the trip at least 5 other times in the past, passing through an immigration checkpoint every time without any issues, according to attorney Danny Woodward from Texas Civil Rights Project, a legal advocacy and litigation organization representing the family. In previous occasions, the parents showed letters from their doctors and lawyers to the officers at the checkpoint to get through, but in early February, the letters weren't enough. They were stopped at the checkpoint. They were arrested after the parents were unable to show legal immigration documentation. The mother, who spoke exclusively to NBC News, said she tried to explain her daughter's circumstances to the officers, but they weren't interested in hearing that. Other than lacking valid immigration status in the U.S., the parents have no criminal history, Woodward said. Protection, which detained and deported the family, according to the lawyer, said in an email Wednesday, for privacy reasons, we do not comment on individual cases. On Thursday, a CBP spokesperson said via email that the reports of the family's situation are inaccurate because when someone is given expelled removal orders and chooses to disregard them, they will face the consequences. They reiterated that they couldn't speak about the specifics of the case for privacy reasons. The 10-year-old girl was diagnosed with brain cancer last year and underwent surgery to remove a tumor. The doctors practically gave me no hope for life for her, but thank God she's a miracle, the mother said. An American citizen is a miracle. The swelling on the girl's brain is still not fully gone, the mother said, causing difficulties with speech and mobility of the right side of her body. Before the family was removed from the U.S., the girl was routinely checked in with doctors monitoring her recovery, attending rehabilitation therapies, and taking medication to prevent convulsions. It's a very difficult thing, the mother said. I don't wish anyone to go through this situation. What is happening to this family is an absolute tragedy and is something that is not isolated to just them, said Rochelle Garcia, president of the Texas Civil Rights Project. This is part of a pattern in practice that we've seen in the Trump administration, Garza said, adding that she has heard of multiple other cases concerning mixed status families. But for now, this is the only case of this nature the organization has taken on. The Trump administration's border czar, Tom Homan, has said families can be deported together regardless of status. Homan said it would be up to the parents to decide whether to depart, leave their children behind. But undocumented parents of U.S.-born children, if picked up by immigration authorities, face the risk of losing custody of their children without the power of attorney document or a guardianship outlining who will take care of their children left behind. The children go into the U.S. foster care system, making it harder for the parents to regain custody of their children in the future. According to the girl's mother, she recalled feeling like she could not do anything. She said in Spanish, "You're between a rock and a hard place." NBC News is withholding the name of the mother and the rest of the family members since they were deported to an area in Mexico that is known for kidnapping U.S. citizens. In addition to the parents and their 10-year-old sick American daughter, 4 of their other American children, ages 15, 13, 8, and 6, were also in the car when they were detained. 4 of the 5 children born in the U.S. According to the mother, the family was taken to a detention center following their arrest, where their mom and daughters were separated from her husband and sons, and she realized she wouldn't be taking her daughter to the doctors. The fear is horrible. I can't explain it, but it's something frustrating, very tough. Something you wouldn't wish on anyone. She said, adding that her sick daughter was laying on a cold floor beneath incandescent lights. Hours later, the family was placed in a van and dropped on the Mexico side of the Texas bridge. From there, they sought refuge in a nearby shelter for a week. Mom said the safety concerns keep coming up at night, and the children haven't been able to go to school. The 10-year-old daughter and 15-year-old son, who lives with a heart disorder known as long QT syndrome, which causes irregular heartbeats and can be life-threatening if not treated well, have not received the health care they need in Mexico. The teen wears a monitor that tracks his heart rate. The authorities have my children's lives in the hands, she said in tears. The authorities have my children's lives in their hands. Both parents arrived to the U.S. from Mexico in 2013 and settled in Texas, hoping for a better life for their family, the mother said. She and her husband both worked for a string of different jobs to support their 6 children. The couple also has a 17-year-old son that they left behind in Texas following their deportation. Just 2 weeks ago, another undocumented mother in California, caring for her 20-year-old daughter, a U.S. citizen undergoing treatment for bone cancer, was detained by immigration authorities and later released under humanitarian parole. We are calling on the government, Garza said, to parole the family, to correct the harm, and to not do this to anyone else.
Gentleman yield.
I think I need to. I'll yield to a question. I'll yield to a question while retaining the floor, and I thank my brother, I thank my friend, who's now stood with me for almost 11 hours.
Those are hard stories to read, Senator Booker, but I appreciate you showing the coldness of this current administration's immigration policy. You know, the tragedy to me is that there's an opportunity to fix what is undoubtedly a broken immigration system. And yet we're into day 71 and Donald Trump has not proposed to us any proposals to fix the broken system. Instead, what he is doing is spending like a drunken sailor on an enforcement system that wastes tens of millions of taxpayer dollars. You described this harrowing experience that this Canadian woman had. And as I was listening to this 2-week ordeal that she went through, being transported from site to site, being processed and reprocessed, as the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Subcommittee of Appropriations, I'm just cataloging in my brain how much money that cost us. Ultimately, this was somebody working in the United States. This was somebody that posed no threat to United States citizens. But we probably spent several $1 million on that 2-week ordeal. Overall, the Trump administration is going to blow through all of the money allocated to Border Patrol. They are going to have to come back to Congress for a massive additional appropriation, all at the same time that they are shuttering medical research in this country. They are closing down Social Security offices. There are measles outbreaks all across the country. Planes seem to be falling out of the sky as the FAA is enduring layoffs. There are consequences to these spending decisions. The amount of money that's being spent at the border, much of it wasted in a showy, ineffective response. The consequence of that is that the services that average everyday Americans need, like help on their Social Security claims, are being impacted. But we need to fix the broken immigration system. And we had an opportunity to do that last year when Republicans and Democrats came together and wrote a bipartisan border security bill that frankly would have allocated tens of billions of additional dollars, that would have fixed our broken asylum system, would have given the president new authorities. And Donald Trump instructed all the Republicans in this chamber to oppose it. In the end, I think 4 senators, including the author, Senator Langford, supported it, but every other Republican here opposed it. And the reason Donald Trump told them to oppose it was that he would fix it when he became president. But we are now in day 72, and there has not been a single proposal from Donald Trump to fix the broken immigration system. Just a whole bunch of spending, essentially money down the drain, because the system itself needs to be reformed. And so it speaks to, my confident belief that Donald Trump does not want to fix our immigration system. He wants to keep this issue open as a sore in our politics. If I was wrong, he would have proposed legislation here to deal with the underlying inefficiency of the system instead of just throwing money at the problem. And so we will see what the result of this campaign is. We're told that immigrants to this country represented a very specific national security threat, that we needed to crack down on immigration, including expelling from this country legitimate asylum seekers, because that was what was necessary to protect the nation. Well, we'll see what the crime data tells us for the first few months of this administration. I have a feeling I already know what the story is. Crime is not going to have gone down. Why? Because, in fact, whether people want to acknowledge this or not, natural-born American citizens commit crimes at rates higher than first-generation immigrants or people born outside of the United States of America. But Senator Booker, I guess the question I want to ask you is this. I think you and I agree that Americans, right, left, and center, acknowledge that the immigration system is broken. I mean, they didn't love it when, they saw thousands of people crossing on an average day. And they know that when it takes 10 years to process an asylum claim, something's wrong, and that it then just provides an incentive for people to come here without documentation. But my impression is that cross-section of Americans that believes that the existing immigration system is broken also believes three other things. One, that the way to fix it is to change the laws, and that they believe that we have not done our job until we have changed the laws. For instance, building a better asylum system. And once again, not a single proposal from the Trump administration